Welcome to the deep dive. Okay, so today we've got quite a collection in front of us. We're focusing on the collected poems of Oscar Wilde.
That's right. Specifically, the 1913 Methuen edition, which Project Gutenberg has, thankfully, made available.
Yeah, it's great source material. And this volume, it brings together his main poetic works, doesn't it? The 1881 poems book, The Sphinx, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, and Ravenna.
Exactly. It's a really significant compilation.
And just glancing through it, you immediately get this sense of variety. It's not just one note.
Not
They're
a
going from classical mythology and these beautiful landscapes to some pretty sharp social commentary.
Yeah.
And then really personal stuff, struggle, life and death.
It's all in there. A huge range across, 2 decades of his writing life?
So the idea today is to kind of navigate through all this, pull out the key insights, the really striking bits from this particular collection you've shared.
Precisely. We want to guide you through what stands out, what's significant about this specific gathering of his poems.
Okay, let's get into it. First, maybe let's just ground ourselves in the source itself. This 1913 Methuen edition. You mentioned it's the 12th edition.
Yeah, the 12th, which, says something about how much interest there still was in his work, even, 13 years after his death?
Definitely. And there's a note in there from Robert Ross, his literary executor. What does that tell us?
Well, it's pretty useful, actually. Ross confirms, yes, we've got the full 1881 poems, plus the big later ones we mentioned, but he also points out something interesting.
Yeah.
He mentions that this edition includes some previously uncollected poems, and importantly, 2 poems called Désespoir and Pan were printed here for the very first time from manuscript.
Ah, okay. So this specific edition actually brought new Wilde material to light at the time. That's a nugget right there.
Exactly. And the source helpfully lists the original publication dates for the main works, gives us a kind of timeline.
Right. Ravenna 78, Poems 81, The Sphinx 94, and then the Ballad in 98.
Yeah. And having that chronology is, it's helpful, isn't it? It lets us track how his style and maybe his preoccupations changed over time.
Helps us see the evolution. Okay, so let's start maybe with those earlier poems, the 1881 volume and some of those uncollected ones you mentioned.
Sounds good. What jumps out immediately, I think, is how engaged he is with the world, even in these early pieces. There's a strong political and social vein running through them.
Yeah, I noticed that. The Eleutheria section, that means liberty.
Oh, yeah. And poems in there like Sonnet to Liberty or Ave Imperatrix, they don't pull any punches about British imperialism.
No, he's quite direct, using phrases like crimson-suited war and calling the armies winged dogs of victory. It feels quite critical.
Deeply critical. He talks about the human cost, the sons lost for every inch of ground. That line, "Oh, Cromwell's England, must thou yield for every inch of ground a son?" It really hits hard.
He seems to be contrasting his present day with, a perhaps idealized version of Cromwell's era, seeing a loss of strength or commitment to freedom.
I think so. That comes up again in poems like To Milton and Quanta Mutata, which means How Changed. He seems to be lamenting a decline, talking about ignorant demagogues in England being like, property sold off, held in fee.
Calling the centers of power a vile traffic house. That's strong language.
It really is. And then there's that sonnet on the massacre of the Christians in Bulgaria. That one feels different again, very raw.
Yeah, it mixes political horror with this kind of religious doubt, almost.
Yeah.
Questioning God's presence.
Right. And that image he uses, seeing the crescent moon over the cross, it suggests this deep anxiety about maybe the decline of Christian Europe or the West in the face of brutality, shows how world events were filtering into his poetry.
But then, almost in reaction to all that, you get a poem like Theoreticos.
Ah, yes.
Which seems to suggest pulling back from all that, from the vile traffic house, and retreating into dreams of art.
Exactly. And that tension, between engaging with the messy world and seeking refuge in beauty or art, that's something you see popping up again and again in this collection, I think.
Okay, so politics and social commentary, that's one major strand. What else dominates these early poems?
Well, you absolutely cannot miss the classical stuff. Greek mythology, nature, beauty, it's everywhere.
Oh, definitely. It feels like you're wading through mythology sometimes. Poems like The Burden of Itys, Charmides, they're just full of it.
Totally.
Yeah.
Nymphs, gods, Persephone, Pan, Artemis, Hylas, Narcissus. The list goes on. And places, too. Arcady, Tempe. It's like he's building this whole idealized, almost escapist classical world.
But it's not just escape, is it? Because he keeps bringing it back to England.
That's the interesting bit, yeah. He talks about the Thames, Magdalen walks in Oxford, Kentish fields, specific English flowers.
Right, and there's that bit in The Burden of Idiots where he almost champions English nature, saying it can be holier far than Rome and has flowers, which Grecian meadows know not.
Yeah, it's like he's finding a similar kind of beauty, maybe even a spiritual depth right there at home. He's not just ditching England for Greece, he's sort of comparing them, finding value in both, perhaps.
But that tension we mentioned, between the ideal and the real, it comes back pretty hard in a poem like Humanitat.
Oh, absolutely. The beauty of nature, the classical ideals, they just slam up against the modern world.
He talks about iron roads profane our lovely isle, doesn't
Oh.
he? And factories creating ignorance.
Yes, crowded factories beget the blindworm ignorance. You get this real sense of him feeling alienated, like out of step with this industrializing England.
So alongside the politics and the classics, there's also this very personal strand exploring love, passion, feelings.
Definitely. Halos is a great example. It feels so introspective, like he's questioning his own life path, wrestling with his passions. And must I lose a soul's inheritance? That line.
Powerful. And Vita Nuova, too, seems to speak of pain, searching for meaning after something difficult.
Right. And you see similar themes in Serenade, La Belladonna della Mia Mente, and that whole section called the Fourth Movement.
What's going on there?
Well, poems like Apologia, wrestling with sorrow and maybe fate, or Quia Multum Amavi, which explores this idea of intense love, but love that leads to pain, maybe even regret.
And Silentium Amoris, silence of love.
Yeah, it captures that feeling when beauty or passion is just overwhelming. It leaves you speechless, or maybe even causes distress being worked wrong by it. So it's often a complex picture of love, quite melancholic sometimes.
Okay, let's shift gears dramatically. The Sphinx from 1894. This one, it's something else entirely.
It really is. Stands completely apart from the rest. Dense, kind of mysterious. The imagery is just wild.
Hallucinatory is a good word for it. What's the basic idea?
The speaker is talking to the Sphinx, the Egyptian Sphinx, basically saying, tell me your secrets. Tell me what you've seen over thousands of years.
And the Sphinx, or the poem, unleashes this flood of images. Ancient, sensual, often quite dark or bizarre.
Oh, yeah. The text is just crammed with references, Egyptian gods like Isis and Osiris, Ammon, Pasht, but also figures from Greek myth, all jumbled together.
And the descriptions of the Sphinx itself. Curious rock crystal breasts, that curved, archaic smile.
Exactly. And then these visions of like Ammon smeared with spikenard and with thyme, the Sphinx hanging out by the steaming Nile, remembering all its ancient lovers and strange experiences.
It feels like a plunge into something forbidden, primal maybe. But the speaker isn't just fascinated, is he? There's a recoil.
Definitely a recoil. The source points out he ends up calling the Sphinx a loathsome mystery, says the encounter wakes up bestial sense and foul dreams.
So it's like this attraction-repulsion thing, exploring this ancient, dark sensuality that's both compelling and deeply disturbing.
I think that's a good way to put it. Fascinating, but also deeply unsettling for the speaker.
Okay, now, The Ballad of Reading Gaol, published in 1898, probably his most famous poem, and impossible to separate from his own life, right?
Absolutely impossible. The dedication in the source text makes it explicit. CTS, Charles Thomas Wooldridge, sometime trooper of the Royal Horse Guards, Obit HM Prison, Reading, Berkshire, July 7, 1896. Wooldridge was a fellow prisoner, executed for murdering his wife.
So this is born directly from Wilde's own imprisonment. And it's a stark contrast to the Sphinx, isn't it? It's narrative, rooted in grim reality.
Completely different. It tells the story of this condemned man.
And the details are so vivid. The suit of shabby gray, the cricket cap, that unforgettable wistful eye.
And that line whispered by another prisoner that echoes through the poem, that fella's got a swing. Chilling.
The poem just paints this brutal picture of prison life.
Yeah.
The dehumanization.
Yeah, calling the prisoners the fool's parade, the devil's own brigade, reducing them to a herd of brutes.
And the sheer pointlessness of the labor tearing terry ropes, scrubbing floors, the constant dread.
And that crushing loss of hope. That line is devastating. Something was dead in each of us, and what was dead was hope.
You really feel the psychological weight, too. The shared guilt, the sword of sin, the terror of the night before the execution. Those flutes of fear.
It's incredibly powerful, and the execution itself describes so starkly the stroke of 8, the hangman's snare.
But what makes it resonate so much, I think, is that recurring refrain.
Absolutely. For each man kills the thing he loves, yet each man does not die. That's the core of it, isn't it?
And the variation, all men kill the thing they love, the coward does it with a kiss, the brave man with a sword. It takes this specific crime and makes it universal.
Exactly. It becomes this profound, if bleak, observation about human nature, about love and passion and their destructive potential, way beyond just the prison walls.
And there's also a direct critique of the justice system itself in there.
Oh, yes, a scathing critique. He talks about man's grim justice with its deadly stride, argues that prisons, built with bricks of shame, are just there to hide how society damages its own people, how men maim their brothers.
He really questions the whole morality of it. But it's not all bleak, is it? There are these little flickers of something else.
That's true. Hints of potential kindness, maybe from God or nature. Lines like, God's kindly earth is kindlier than men know.
Right, and the idea that maybe a redder rose would grow from the grave, it's almost paradoxical.
It is, and there's that ending about redemption, healing through tears of blood. It offers just a sliver of hope, maybe, against the overwhelming harshness.
Okay, one more main piece to touch on. Ravenna. This was his earliest published work in the collection, right, from 1878.
Yeah, it won the Newdigate Prize at Oxford. And it feels very much like, well, a prize poem in some ways, a kind of historical travelogue.
It starts with him contrasting the English spring he's currently in with his memories of Italy, of Ravenna, from the previous year.
Exactly. And then it becomes this meditation on the city's history, thinking about the famous people connected to it.
Who does he mention? I saw Theodoric.
Yep, Theodoric the Goth.
And-
And Dante, of course, who died there in exile. Wilde even quotes that famous line about how hard it is to climb stairs in kings' houses, how steep the stairs within kings' houses are, really capturing the pain of Dante's exile.
And Byron, too, right?
Right.
Linking him to liberty in Greece.
Yes, celebrates Byron's love for Greece and freedom. So the poem weaves through Ravenna's history, Roman times, its decline, and then brings it up to the present day, the new Italia, celebrating that the Austrian hounds are hunted from the land. A bit of contemporary politics in there.
And stylistically, it mixes that history with the classical allusions we saw in other early poems, Pan, Dryads, Diana, but also Christian elements like a convent bell, Gethsemane.
It does. It shows him already blending these different historical and cultural threads right from the beginning of his career.
Wow. Okay, so stepping back from the individual poems, we've really covered a lot of ground within just this one collection.
It's quite the journey, isn't it? Really shows you the sheer range of Wilde's poetic interests and styles.
And those recurring tensions we talked about, they really come through when you look at it all together.
Definitely. That constant push and pull between the ideal, beauty, art, freedom, the classical past, and the often harsh realities of life suffering, injustice, industrialization, loss, pain.
Yeah, the ideal versus the difficult reality. It seems to be a central theme.
I think so. And always filtered through this intense focus on personal experience, on emotion, even when he's writing about big historical or political ideas.
And the shifts in tone and style are just remarkable from the, quite lush, sometimes ornate early poems,
To the strange, dense world of the Sphinx.
and then hitting the stark, raw realism of the Ballad of Reading Jail. It's quite a transformation, or maybe an expansion of his voice.
It really highlights why diving deep into a collected works like this one you shared is so valuable. You get the whole picture, or at least a much fuller one.
So, to wrap up our deep dive into this specific collection of Wilde's poems, we've seen him tackle empire, escape into classical beauty, explore disturbing ancient mysteries, and confront the brutal realities of prison and death.
It's been fascinating to trace these threads through the source material you brought us. Really shows the complexity there.
Okay, here's something for you, the listener, to think about. Drawing from what we've discussed, we talked a lot about that line from the ballad, "Each man kills the thing he loves." Now, take that idea and think about the other poems in this collection. How do they also show love, whether it's love for beauty, love for freedom, love for another person, love for an ideal getting tangled up with pain, loss, even destruction?
Interesting angle.
Think about the disillusionment in the political poems or the sadness in some of the personal ones, even the speaker's troubled reaction to the Sphinx's sensuality. What overall, perhaps difficult message might this whole collection convey about how beauty, love, and suffering are often intertwined?
That's a rich question to ponder. Lots to think about there.
Keep exploring your sources.